strength and in power, determined to care for earth and sea.
Aloha and welcome to Hawaii Conservation Kuleana, brought to you by Hawaii's Department of Land and Natural Resources. I'm Dan Dennison.
And I'm Patty Jetty. We're here to explore conservation issues from land to sea with expert insights and stories from the field.
The connection to place and the impact that we're able to make at those places, that's really special.
In this episode, we're with the team who guides the path forward in protecting our forest, wildlife, and watersheds, the Division of Forestry and Wildlife, also known as DOFAW.
Aloha. Today we have DOFAW Administrator David Smith and Marigold Zoll from DOFAW's Oʻahu branch. Thanks for joining us.
Tell us about your background, your ohana, and your early life. Dave, let's start with you.
Okay, I was born in Kailua on Oʻahu and raised in Lanikai. Grew up about 4 houses from the beach and spent most of my time outdoors, either in the ocean or in the mountains. So hiking, backpacking, playing in the water, surfing, sailing, outrigger canoes, fishing, diving. So really we were just little outdoor kids, and back in the day it was pretty feral too. We were just running around in little packs and nobody's hovering over us. So it was we really excelled in the outdoors and managed not to kill ourselves and got pretty good at surviving out there.
Just a follow-up question. It sounds like you were very aquatic or marine focused. How did you get into forestry, just from being out in the forest occasionally?
Well, I did spend a lot of time in the mountains, and I spent a lot of time hiking and backpacking. I was in the Boy Scouts. I was an Eagle Scout, Bronze Bomb, Order of the Arrow, really into, and we were basically just a backpacking club, and we did all kinds of extreme backpacking, and got lost many times, and kind of survival backpacking. But anyway, spent a lot of time in the mountains as well. Started out my professional career interested in marine sciences and worked for a little bit in that field, but then just gravitated more toward refuge and land management on the terrestrial side.
Great. Marigold.
Well, I grew up on Kauai, mostly on the east side, kind of in coastal areas like Anahola, Molowa'a, kind of remote areas. Spent a lot of time on the beaches, looking for like glass balls and swimming and stuff like that. In Molowa'a, there was a colony of albatross that were up on the bluff that was really cool. And like David, like just feral kind of, spending a lot of time in the stream, spearfishing for prawns and going up into Kokee, hiking around in the mountains, looking for plums and stuff like that. Yeah, so it was that paired with spending a lot of time summers on the East Coast around Washington, D.C. and the Smithsonian Museums, Museum of Natural History, the art museums. So kind of those two juxtaposed really fostered an appreciation of the natural world and science and art.
So you're both feral keiki. Does that give you a insight and understanding to all the feral species that you deal with?
Yeah, we're in for it.
So let's get into the division a little bit. Tell us what the division is really responsible for. What kind of assets do you manage and protect?
So we manage really the places that make Hawaii, our most precious natural spaces, native ecosystems. The Natural Area Reserve System is a really good example of that, where we're trying to protect representative examples of Hawaiian ecosystems across the state. And so from those places, endangered species are, our biodiversity, the wildlife sanctuaries that protect our water birds and seabirds, and then the places that provide forest products where we collect plants for our most special occasions, like holidays and celebrations, where we play and hunt and fish and hike, things like that. We manage, a quarter of the land mass in the state of Hawaii, so it's quite a large area of land that we're responsible for.
Dave, can you talk about organizationally how you're structured? You have operations on every Hawaiian island.
Yeah, we have branches on each island. So we have an administrative branch here in Honolulu that helps to support the branches. And then there's branches on each major island or island group. So Maui Nui has Maui, Molokai, and Lanai. And, the branches are fairly independent. The branch managers report directly to me and not to their counterparts at either forestry, wildlife, or natural areas. So there's a continuity in the administrative structure, but there's also an independence because every island and island group has its own demographics and natural resources, and it varies up and down the chain. And so, we're kind of set up to accommodate the fact that things are slightly different on different islands.
We should note that Marigold is the Oʻahu branch chief branch manager for DOFAW. We kind of jokingly talked about feral species, and so let's talk about some of the challenges. And what comes to mind is, in our office we get so many complaints and comments about feral cats, and you deal with feral ungulates and the impacts that they have on forest lands and all. So expand a little bit on that and what's happened over, say, the past 5 years to 10 years to try to address some of these issues with feral animals or invasive species.
Okay, well, a lot of things we manage are, endangered species and biodiversity, invasive species, forest health, watershed management, and the feral animals or introduced species really play into a lot of what we do. And some things get established over here and don't really create a lot of problem or in some ways beneficial, but a lot of the feral animals, whether they be weeds or animals, create a real problem. And so, for instance, in Hawaii, we didn't have any natural predators. And so to have, cats, rats, dogs, mongooses out on the landscape really creates a lot of problems for our native ecosystems, our biodiversity, and really plays havoc with a lot of our native species. And so, that's kind of the invasive species piece, which takes up a lot of our time. It's just, and expense is just managing. For instance, over here, just to manage an area, you have to fence it. Right off the bat, you have to fence it. It's really expensive. And then you have to have ongoing operations to do predator control or weed control. And so it's just a constant battle, what we call a lot of the native ecosystems conservation dependent because there's so much work that goes into being able to maintain them.
And Marigold, having been to many of these areas that Dave just spoke of, for your staff and your crews out in the field, this is really rough, tough work that they're doing.
Yeah, it really is. And so it takes a huge amount of personal interest and dedication and passion and just drive to keep doing this work because a lot of it is really daunting. And especially with the endangered species work, if you look at the numbers, it's really sad, and it's there's a lot of emotional distress that our staff carries because of the work that they do. But on the flip side, it seems like there's an upwelling of public interest in wanting to help us care for these places. And so we're not in it alone. And there's a lot of opportunity for folks to help us and to help shoulder the burden of this kuleana.
The thing that really comes to mind is the plight of the native forest birds, not so much here on Oʻahu, but certainly on Kauai, Maui, and the Big Island. So, Dave, we're on the cusp of probably losing one or more species of these native endemic forest birds to avian malaria. Are we doing enough to try to stem the tide, so to speak, or what else can be done, if anything?
Well, we're doing what we can. We're dealing with disease, which is very difficult. And, it's a mosquito-borne disease. So as long as we have mosquitoes, we have the issue. And how do you control mosquitoes? So certainly our people that are out there and the resources that we have are being applied well. But we've seen the trajectory for decades now. My entire career, the trajectory has been down for these birds. And unless we can get the disease situation under control, their plight is I'm not optimistic. Some of the birds have turned the corner naturally. They've started to develop natural resistance to avian malaria, but some of the species are going to run out of time before they develop that. And if it keeps going the way it's going, they're going to go extinct. And the only thing that we're not doing maybe is spending enough money, having enough resources. We're doing everything we can with what we've got, but in order to move forward and provide more protection, we're going to need considerably more resources to be able to provide that kind of management.
And we know that when we have the resources to do the work, the species respond a lot of times, right? And so with the plant extinction prevention program, we were losing a species a year before we started getting the funding to support the work. And once that funding was in place, we haven't lost any species. And the same is true for some forest birds on Oʻahu. The Army Natural Resource Program and DOFAW have been doing a lot of work on Elepaio, our native flycatcher. And just this last year, the Army reported that it saw an Elepaio in Pahole Natural Area Reserve for the first time in like 20 years. And so the numbers are expanding. They're going outside of the areas that are directly managed. And so we know that if we have the resources to do the work, then the species will respond.
A shining example that comes to mind is the albatross at Kaena Point, and you and I have talked about that extensively over the years. Just kind of trace the history of how that all developed and what it's like today.
Oh, gosh. So back in the day, you can see pictures of Kaena Point, and it's there's no vegetation. It's just a sand dune. People were driving all over it. And then Dave was the first natural area reserves manager on Oʻahu, and his first job was to start barricading off the area to off-roaders. And so with that first step at removing that impact, the vegetation started coming back, seabirds started nesting, people started doing rat control, making sure cats and dogs weren't in the area, doing weed control. And now we have a predator-proof fence, and the numbers of albatross keep increasing. The shearwaters are like taking up every inch of available nesting habitat. The vegetation is like totally overgrowing the trails. You can barely like walk through some of the trails. I mean, it's really just a shining example of how when you apply the right management tools, the ecosystem really responds.
Dave, you take a lot of pride in what's happened out there?
Yeah, that was one of my first projects, and quite a challenging one. Hey, shut off the most popular off-road vehicle area in the island. But, we went out and did a lot of outreach, and I did have people that previously used the area that were really happy with the way that it had recovered. And it's just a beautiful area now. There was no seabirds nesting out there when we took over and started, I fenced the area, put up barricades to keep out vehicles. And then, slowly birds started coming back, and then they were getting hit by predators. We started predator control, and it's just been an upward trajectory since then. So it's really been a successful program. Like Marigold says, a lot of these species are really responsive to management. And if you go out there and remove some of those stressors from them, then like getting run over by a truck or eaten by a mongoose, other than that, they're doing pretty well, So, and the seabirds are very responsive to management, and so that's been a real success story.
One of the neat things that we didn't really anticipate was the response of the sandalwood out there. And before the rats and mice were removed, you would never see any seeds, and now you see tons of seeds, and the plants are expanding. And so you just don't know sometimes how things are going to respond when you do something, like we put up the fence for the birds, but then the plants ended up benefiting, and probably the yellow-faced bees will benefit too, and everything else.
Actually, that brings up what I was going to talk about next, which is threatened plants. So we just went, we have a lot of threatened birds here. How about the plants that are threatened here? What are some of the biggest threats? I know rapid ohia death is a big issue here. And also, how do you protect threatened plants? We have trails that people want to take and they want to use, and they just see a plant and they say, oh, green thing. They don't necessarily know what might be a sensitive endemic plant. So how do you handle that type of thing with DOFAW?
Just try to help people understand the importance of biodiversity and how unique some of our species are, and try not to take it upon themselves to, indiscriminately cut things. And so that appreciation. And then a lot of our crews are really well trained, and so they'll go through and do trail maintenance, but they know try not to cut the native species and whatnot, other than for clearance and whatnot. So a lot, and it becomes almost gardening. You're out there gardening constantly. The other thing about like rare plants on trails, it's like, yeah, they're on the, they are on the trails, but they're probably elsewhere too, so it's not the end of the world. And it kind of brings up the fact that a lot of the work that we do has multiple stakeholders and sometimes conflicting, so recreation and rare plants, a trail going through, native forest, public hunting, which involves, introduced mammals, which can also have a negative impact on forest health. So trying to balance all these different kinds of things and do the right thing in the right place and try to get people to understand the importance of having certain restrictions in other areas. It's kind of how it goes with the plants. Plants are really quite, we have an incredibly unique plant diversity here in Hawaii. A lot of things found nowhere else in the world. And some people aren't as keyed into plants, and so they don't maybe appreciate that as much, but trying to get folks to at least accept and appreciate things that maybe aren't top of mind for them.
And so on the more technical side of the like the plant extinction prevention program, they focus on plants that have less than 50 individuals left in the wild. And there's like 250 species of them, right? So there's really a lot of those. And they go out and they'll collect seeds from each individual. They track every individual and they try to get genetic representation of everybody and then put it into a seed lab where those seeds are stored. And they test them for viability so that we know how long they last in that storage under those conditions. And then they grow them out and they outplant them into protected places. So there's that really intense species-specific kind of management. And then there's also more of the broad ecosystem management of fencing off larger areas, removing the major stressors like the feral mammals, the goats and pigs and things, removing the ecosystem modifying weeds like strawberry guava, Angiopteris, stuff like that, so that we can have a safe place to outplant the rare plants back into and try and keep those places from becoming converted into a non-native forest, because it's really difficult and expensive to take like a strawberry guava forest and convert it to a biodiverse native forest, right? So we want to try and hold on to those places that still are intact.
And there's, maybe it's because it's a division of forestry and wildlife, but there's a real nexus between the plant world and the animal world in terms of your management, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interconnected system. So whether it be forest birds or seabirds, there's, for instance, with seabirds, they're out there going out in the ocean and getting fish and coming back and bringing nitrogen back. And there's this whole nutrient cycling thing where when you don't have those things anymore, there's a whole piece of the ecosystem missing. So kind of like what Marigold was saying, you don't even know what you've lost sometimes until you start to protect it. And then all of a sudden things start to bloom. And so, our mission is to kind of create landscape scale protected areas and then let those ecosystem processes, return.
It should be noted that of all the DLNR divisions, DOFAW is the largest and probably the most diverse in many respects. And Marigold mentioned, or you mentioned, education and outreach. I must say that you folks really have a really active education outreach, very creative education outreach program, probably more so than the other divisions. Talk a little bit about that and what the goal behind all that outreach and education might be.
Well, gosh, education outreach can span from media stuff all the way to K through 12, classroom stuff and everything in between. And so, for me, I'm really trying to find ways to connect people with places through our outreach and volunteer opportunities. And so, in Waimanalo, we have this problem with koki frogs, right? But the community has really rallied, and they want to help protect the place and be part of the solution. And so we're issuing permits to trained volunteers to go out on their own and help us with that problem, right? And so I think that as we educate folks about what they can do, we train them, and then they can help be an extension of our work in, on the landscape, I think is really an impactful way of getting boots on the ground to help care for these places.
And you have tons of volunteer opportunities. How would the listeners find out about those?
Oh, they're listed on our website. Yeah, and we're trying to develop more and more opportunities as we go along. and just enable folks to find what resonates with them so that they can intersect with us and help in the way that they feel most compelled to do so.
Great. And I believe the website is dlnr.hawaii.gov/DOFA.
Yeah.
We've had great response on various volunteer trips, and lately we've been doing some really large volunteer trips for trail maintenance here on Oʻahu, and it's been terrific response. I mean, I think we had 70 people the first time, 60 people the second time. So,
Before we move on, probably the most recognizable, or one of the most recognizable things is the Na'alahele Trail and Access System. Talk a little bit about that. How many miles, how many trails, if you know, but just in general, that's a big part of what DOFAW does statewide.
Yeah, we have our statewide trail and access program. On Oʻahu, we have about 100 miles of roads and trails that are in the program. And then there are many other trails and roads that are not designated Na'alahele program trails, too. So there's quite a large inventory of trails that people use. We're trying to manage the trails in a way that makes them safe for folks to use, that have information about them so that they can judge their own ability levels and figure out where the best place for them might be to go and connect with nature, right? And so a lot of our management is water control on the trails and vegetation control. Yeah, there's a lot of people who like to hike. And so that's really a huge opportunity to connect with folks who have that interest, right? And to be able to convert that into helping us care for our trails, right?
Yeah, you're definitely one of our divisions that interfaces, I'd say, equally with local residents as well as our visitors, tourists who come here. So it's interesting. I'm sure that presents its own challenges.
yeah, and our trails are well used by local residents. So people say, oh, the tourists on the trails, but it's like we do surveys. Sometimes it's 80% local residents. So people really like to get out there and get into the woods and get onto our coastal areas and utilize our trails. We manage over 500 miles of roads and trails in the state. And it is, like Marigold says, one of our probably one of our most popular programs.
So what do you find invigorating/challenging about leading the division?
Invigorating, well, just the resources that we get to manage. I mean, it's like a real honor to be able to work with the things that we work and if you're kind of a biology geek like we are, you're getting to work with things that are some of the rarest things, the species in the world and whatnot. You're getting to go to just some of the most spectacular landscapes on Earth, and work in these really, really unique areas. We get to do, fun stuff like driving around four-wheel drives and flying in helicopters, and that's great fun. And we get to go up into areas that most people will never have an opportunity to get to, and so all that is super fun. The other piece is that we're working with super dedicated people. Like I look into management and leadership stuff, and a lot of it's just like how do you motivate your people. And here, it's like, how do you hold them back? They're raring to go, and they're super dedicated and just will do whatever it takes to get out there and try to get the job done. So that's another really great piece of what we do, is that just having people that are so enthusiastic and dedicated to the work.
And I often joke, having been a longtime former broadcaster and journalist, we're kind of instinctively look down our noses at government workers, and I've only been here a little more than a decade, and I think it was from DOFAW people originally. I came in and I would comment to friends and family. I said, boy, was I wrong, because those people are passionate, dedicated, don't get paid enough in most cases, and just I did a complete 180 on how I look at government workers because of DLNR and DOFAW.
Yeah, and so one of the challenges is, obviously the history of land in Hawaii and the separation of people from place and all that trauma that happened, and acknowledging that is a real challenge, because when we go to public meetings, we often get, yelled at, and there's all this baggage that people still have and are carrying that they project onto us, right? I think that's a real opportunity to try to use what we can to reconnect people with these places and to find ways for them to help care for the places that have been in their families for so long. It's really people just caring about what's happening and wanting to be part of it. And I think that's the real inspiring and motivating part of my job.
In fact, you incorporate cultural aspects of the place we live and the host culture in a lot of your programs.
We do, yeah. And a lot of our staff, myself included, went through a Hawaiʻi training program to learn more about Hawaiian life ways and perspective, and to incorporate that in the work that we do. And that's a growing kind of trend in our division, and just using traditional Hawaiian practices to inform the work that we do, and to when you oli before you go into a space, it's a safety procedure, right? You're taking a moment to look around and take stock of the weather and the conditions, and to center yourself in what you are going to be doing, and making sure that you're safe and everybody is, on board with what's happening. And so there's a lot of really great opportunities to meld that traditional Hawaiian practice with the work.
Yeah, for instance, this is the year of the community forest, and community forestry, people getting involved in forest management, getting involved in traditional and customary practice, and that's part of our responsibility, is to provide those opportunities where it's compatible. And now with urban community forestry, but we really focus on the community, you get a lot of these, agroforestry type of opportunities, traditional customary practice, and it starts, Makai, more of the wetland areas, lo'i, taro lo'i, and whatnot, and then you move up into more diverse agricultural landscapes, and then you move into the more the native type of landscape. So it's, we manage from the top of the mountains out actually to the coast and out into the ocean. We have offshore island seabird sanctuaries. We manage from one tip, the eastern tip of the Hawaii Island, all the way out to Curry Atoll at the farthest northwest Hawaiian Islands. So we have this huge diversity and array of areas that we manage, and just trying to help people be on the landscape to the extent that it's compatible, and do the work that we do in more protected areas is really a challenge, and it's also very rewarding.
So one thing I've been curious about since we first started talking here, since both of you grew up here in Hawaii, how have things changed in terms of the landscape and stewardship? What have you seen since you were little kid times?
Well, I'd say that this idea of keeping people out of places in order to protect them has really shifted to recognizing that you need to incorporate people into those places and into the management. I think that that's a really big change that's happened in my career. I mean, just obviously the population boom in Hawaii is the biggest change. On Kauai, there was like one stoplight when I was a kid, Now
there's two. A few more than that.
So, yeah, I think in the conservation world sense, that shift in acknowledging the human role in the environment is a big change for me.
Yeah, the sheer numbers of people is one thing, but also the whole social media thing has just blown everything up. And when we were kids, there's all kinds of secret little spots, right? Secret trails, secret beaches, secret areas in the mountains. And now everything is available to anybody. Just type into your phone, hiking trails near me, and will get everything that exists. And so the ability for people to go places where they would have never even known to go before. And then now there's this kind of mentality of this, what I call the Instagram mentality. You want to go out, you see a picture, I want to go get my picture there. Well, you may not be really able to go there physically. Your capabilities may not allow you to safely go there. And yet people don't seem to understand where they are capable of, like for instance, do you paddle out into, 12-foot pipeline if you're not a really avid surfer? But people will go out into the mountains and do things in the mountains that, they end up getting hurt, they end up getting flown out. They just don't seem to recognize where they can safely navigate. And it seems to be driven by social media. So that's a really challenging piece of what we do.
It is, but I do think that hearkening back to traditional Hawaiian customs of like asking for permission and, you know, kind of these values that if we can start to turn the corner and raise them up, then maybe that will help to change people's behavior and interfacing with these places.
Kind of goes back to the education piece too. You know, trying to educate people about. We don't want to discourage people from going places, but we do want them to be able to navigate safely and not cause harm. And what we find is, like in a lot of times, people don't mean to cause harm, but they just don't know. And so the education piece is great because when you tell people something, oh, don't do this because there's a reason, they're like, oh, okay. You know, a lot of times they're just fine with that. They just don't know. So a lot of it's just ignorance, just based on the fact that they don't understand. And so the education piece is really important in terms of trying to get people to behave in ways that are pono for the natural environment, but also help preserve health and safety.
It seems like social media and discernment are at opposite ends of the spectrum, that people believe whatever they see on social media, and if it's on social media, it must be open and ready for everybody to visit, which is not the case in many cases. And that's when people get into trouble, as we've seen time and time again. You both could work about anywhere. Dave's spent most of his career here. You're mid-career, I guess. Why DLNR? Why DOFAW? What keeps you going?
The people that we work with and the places that we get to work with. Yeah, that's really... I've worked in a lot of different organizations, but it's the connection to place and the impact that we're able to make at those places that's really special.
Yeah, DLNR provides such a platform for doing conservation work. I mean, I really can't think of a better place to work. If your interest is in conservation, that's our mission. And so if you want to get out and be able to work in a diverse array of landscapes and ecosystems and do really meaningful conservation work, I don't think there's a better place. There's lots of other organizations and agencies that are doing really good work, but this is a very good place if you want to do that sort of work.
All right, that wraps it up for this episode. Mahalo to you both.
And mahalo to our listeners for joining us today. I'm Dan Dennison.
And I'm Patty Jetty.
Our theme music is provided by Kavika Kahiapo.
Thanks for tuning in to Hawaii Conservation Kuleana. A hui ho.
Ilo pono, me ka aina, o me ke kai.